This is the Hidden Killers podcast with Tony Brueski,
featuring former FBI Special Agent and Chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, Robin Dreeke.
James Burke, who was the Suffolk County Police Chief for quite some time, really creating an atmosphere there within the department where victims or sex workers, I'm assuming based on what we've seen, probably didn't feel very safe coming forward, considering his own involvement in the industry. How much do you think that played a role in cases during his reign that went unsolved beyond Heuermann?
You know, this brings up a really important aspect of not just this case, but cases across the country. The saddest thing out of everything that you and I chat about and people that follow true crime, I think the greatest true crime that goes on is this industry, the sex worker industry. And it's not them. This is probably the most victimized group of people in our society. I looked at the stats in this hard because I've given numerous talks on this in the last couple of weeks. This group tends to be the most trafficked as teenagers, basically sold into slavery to save their lives. So they're victimized at a young age, and then they're continually being victimized. And then because of their line of work, that was not their choice to get into. I think it's 98% or it's up in the 90s of people in the sex worker industry did not do this by choice. They were put into this by heinous predators to begin with. And so then when law enforcement then marginalizes them, society marginalizes them, and you are told that what you do is shameful, you lived in remorse. I mean, these are all you can't make a better recipe for destroying someone's self-worth and courage to come forward to try to do something right than this. This is why the serial rapists, the serial killers, all these people choose this group to victimize because no one will listen to them. I have seen it time and time again in these cases we cover. And I think this is the worst case scenario here, where it's not just the serial killer or killers in Long Island, because we have so many other victims, but law enforcement themselves was victimizing them, not just not listening to them, but utilizing them because he was a crook. I mean, it is absolutely, our society does not do a good enough job going towards a root of all this, which is child trafficking. It starts there. It really does start there.
That's where so much of it starts, and there seems to be such a hesitance in many ways to dig into some of these areas because, I mean, to just speak how, people are thinking, makes you feel uncomfortable, that's icky, that's dark, that doesn't, it's easier if we don't think about it. That seems to be how a lot of society plays it. But this doesn't happen in a bubble. This isn't just the issue in Suffolk County. All over the country, you're going to have this issue with police departments looking at these folks as lesser than, a society looking at them as lesser than. I'm not just trying to pick on police here by any means. It's a societal issue where people aren't accepting that, look, these folks did not choose to do this. Yes, they're in that life. Yes, they are desperate. Is there going to be more crime and drugs involved with these folks than others? Yes, that's the world that they live in, came from, and were put into, but without choice. That is also a world where you're probably going to, if you dig into it deeper, find tentacles that go far deeper than just that one person on the surface that's involved in sex work. But again, we don't seem to realize, I mean, if you're trying to solve crime, I guess what a honeypot that is of potential leads and directions you can go by digging into the uncomfortable that is the sex work industry.
And it takes time to build relationships of trust where they will feel trust to share. I work with law enforcement all the time for years, both when I was FBI and since retiring. And when you're in law enforcement and your executives and the bosses and leaders above you are placing a lot of pressure and stress on you to give numbers. They want arrests, they want convictions, and they want sources on board now. If you can't come up with it now, we got to move on. But in order to develop relationships with individuals that can provide the type of information spontaneously and proactively, like this group of people can, it takes time to develop these relationships. This was my job in the FBI, was developing confidential human sources that would proactively give information. And strikingly, but not surprisingly, this to me is like watching NASCAR for some people. You don't watch NASCAR to really sit there and see them make sure that cars are safe, that they don't crash, that they're going to go around the track very mundanely, and the best guy wins or woman. What they're waiting for is a wreck.
Yeah.
And when a wreck happens, they don't go, oh, we need to make this safer. They're just like, when's the next wreck going to happen? And that's the same thing here. We could actually fix a lot of these problems with serial rapists and serial killers if we don't have victims to victimize. But we don't want to do that as a society. We just want to see the wreck sometimes. And you know why I come up with this? Again, pure conjecture and theory. I look at my numbers for the downloads for the shows I'm on. Yeah. The ones that cover serial rapists are the lowest netting numbers that anyone watches compared to Let's Get the Killer.
How interesting is that?
Yeah.
And it's such an issue that many are very passionate about, but then how that stat speaks so loudly. If people are out there who have knowledge, because we've heard the evidence that was turned over early on from people who knew at least one of the victims, very detailed evidence of Heuermann, of his vehicle, was given to the authorities. If police won't listen, if people won't listen, what does one do no matter where they are? If they have knowledge of crimes like this or themselves are a victim of something like this where they need to go somewhere to be safe and be listened to.
Well, that's where the relationship between law enforcement and authorities have to have a relationship. You know, it's called community policing. Organizations, towns, and groups that have great community policing with people walking around, being a part of the community, from the community, interacting with the community, they're the ones that actually have a lower crime rate. And when they happen, they're solved really rapidly. And you can see it. You can see it when you're watching the news. I was commenting on the horrific shooting yesterday at UNC. And when I looked at the tremendous police response, immediately, all organized, all very calm, methodical, that looked like to me a large number of law enforcement that had a very healthy relationship with each other and the campus and the town around there, because they've been through this before, so they start getting some reps in. But those are the kind of things and the kind of relationships that make these kind of things happen. Unfortunately, the greatest voices that solve these things proactively have been the greatest victims of them. And so it takes someone to get outside that comfort zone. I mean, just look at who the news covers and who shows cover in general that are victimized. They're covering the good-looking people. They're covering the people that it's shocking that this would happen to this individual. As soon as they show a background, a face, or someone that looks like they don't quite add up to what we expect of being horrific. Oh, it's just someone that is marginalized, and it kind of falls by the wayside, even though the crime itself is exactly the same, even though how it happened, how they became victims is a much more tragic story than everything else. So it's just an observation I've had over the last couple of years doing this.
Sure.
But that's why I love shows like this, because we cover everything that's of importance, and every life is important.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast.
Want more? Start binging on all of our true crime podcasts right now through Apple Podcasts, and get an ad-free experience when you sign up to be a True Crime Today Premium Plus member, exclusively on Apple Podcasts.
More of the Hidden Killers Podcast, dropping soon.
Press subscribe now.